We're live now.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the International Commission for Human Rights and Religious Freedom. Today is a special session of our Speaking Up series program. On behalf of the Board of Directors and the executive team of the ICHRRF, I invite our audience to yet another session, a special session in the ICHRRF Speaking Up series. And just for introduction, this is our logo of the ICHRRF. A little bit of information about the ICHRRF, International Commission for Human Rights and Religious Freedom, is a US-based nonprofit focused on upholding human rights and religious freedom through continuous monitoring, policy intervention, and collaboration. We are focused on the educational, research, legal, and human rights advocacy and charitable purposes. And we strive to be an advocate for the human rights and religious freedoms of the underrepresented communities across the world. We do believe that humankind can no longer afford to be selectively vocal about the rights of only a specific set of people. A humane and just world necessitates fair treatment of all living beings. Our focus is on indigenous rights and freedom, free speech, and their cultural preservation. Some of our current initiatives include monitoring violations of freedoms and sanctity of religious and philosophical minorities across the world, research into and documentation of the culture, history, and challenges faced by some communities, conducting special hearings on human rights violations, policy recommendations on human rights, religious diversity, and pluralism to international organizations, agencies, national and local governments, collaboration to support the cultural and philosophical diversity across the world, and more recently, from January 1st, 2022, we have started Professor Ved Nanda Fellowship Training Programs in Human Rights to train the next generation of academics and activists and scholars in the field of human rights and religious freedom. So the topic for today's special session of Speaking Up series is Beijing Winter Olympics and human rights violations. Today is Saturday, February 19, 2022, couple of days before the closing ceremony of the Beijing Winter Olympics. These Olympics, like 1936 Summer Olympics, have been called Genocide Olympics or Games of Shame. I am going to share some of the visuals showing No Olympics Beijing 2022. This visual on Genocide Olympics showed the occupied nations and territories that are under control of Communist China and its PLA, and that includes Tibet, Southern Mongolia, East Turkestan, Hong Kong, and ever-threatened Taiwan. Again, a protest symbol, and of course, people protesting and calling for shame on China. And this is an Uyghur activist asking for boycott of Beijing 2022 Olympics. It's not just the Communist Party of China or the government of People's Republic of China that bears the shame. The shame is shared also by the International Olympic Committee and the corporate sponsors who are basking in the reflected glory. So I think it is shameful conduct that these games are being allowed to be carried out in 21st century when the human rights record of communist China is so dismal. We have a number of speakers for today's symposium. Usually our practice is to give an introduction in detail about our speakers. However, for two reasons, I'm not going to give a detailed introduction. One is to save time because we have a number of speakers and we want to accommodate everyone and we have very little time. But there's a second reason why I would not give detailed introductions. And the reason is security and safety of our speakers and their families. Some of our speakers have their families in the nations occupied by China, and there's an ever-present threat of harassment, intimidation, arrest, and disappearance of family members of activists who speak against the Communist Party and People's Republic of China. So I will just keep on giving one-line introduction for each speaker rather than giving a detailed introduction. There are some housekeeping rules. Kindly mute yourself to avoid noise interference. Please change your cell phone setting to vibration mode. Please do not try to interrupt our esteemed speakers. Only those members of the audience who identify themselves openly will be allowed to pose questions. No anonymous questions, please. All the questions have to be sent by the chat function. When you're sending your questions, please be very specific and precise in asking a question. Please do not send comments in the form of monologue. And lastly, we are recording this session. So like all our programs, this would be available within 24 hours for people to view. And yes, there will be some introduction of our speakers at that point in time, but we want to keep the information to minimal so that their families are not harassed. Our first speaker does not need any introduction, and I can be open about him because he does not face any such consequences. He is an esteemed legal scholar, international scholar of law, specifically international law. He has sat on several international bodies dealing with human rights and religious freedom. He is also chairperson of our International Advisory Board, as well as member board of directors. And I'm talking about none other than Professor Ved P. Nanda, in whose honor ICHRRF also conducts a fellowship training program in human rights. So without further ado, I am going to invite Professor Ved Nanda to give his opening address for this very important symposium on a very serious issue. So Professor Ved Nanda, floor is yours, sir.
Good morning, everyone. And thank you very much, Adityanji, for very generous and kind words. I might just mention that, yes, with the American Bar Association Human Rights Center, I sat on their executive committee for executive council for many, many years, executive board, and now I'm serving on their advisory committee. And we had a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, a small task force on which I served. And that task force is the one that interviewed, talked with, worked on many human rights defenders in China. Many of them exiled, several of them who were detained. And after having done that work, we sent note, obviously, to China. And there wasn't any response from them, and then made an effort in order to reach the United Nations and all those bodies that might be able to do something about it. So working on human rights for some time, Adityanji, I think it's a very, very apt opportunity, time, in order to talk about it. Because tomorrow they are going to close the Olympics. And there are, from the very beginning, calls that these Olympics should never have been given to China because egregious violations of human rights that were so obvious and for so long, and to have the opportunity to a country like that was not appropriate. But in any event, now that the Olympics are there, let us look at what has happened there. You very appropriately mentioned that the International Olympic Committee, that has partnership with the Communist Party of China and all the top sponsors, and there are 13 of them, there was complete silence. And anytime somebody mentioned anything critical, because they didn't normally, then immediately the answer was Olympics are not the place to do that, and we ought not to say anything that is against the Chinese laws and regulations. And as a matter of fact, the government had from the very beginning mentioned to all those athletes that they must follow Chinese laws and regulations. And under those laws, as you probably know, what has happened is complete censorship in Olympics. And I'll give 3, 4 examples because Human Rights Watch has done some work on it. Guardian did, some other organizations have done. And I'll just mention a few because there was that Dutch reporter who was dragged. And because the reason was that he was taking pictures that they didn't want those pictures to be taken. And this was Dutch public radio, and was making some kind of comments. And then IOC said that was simply an isolated event. And that was not, because there are German, there are Finnish, there are Swedish who have gone back Olympians. And after going back, they have spoken about it. And you probably know one of those from Finland, cross-country skier, and he had taken some pictures. And one picture was there was water flooding in the place where she was staying. And they simply said that you have to delete those pictures, and had to delete those pictures. This Swedish, this was a person who left Olympics, and only then he started talking about it. And you recall, those who watched the Olympics, and I did, that this was a Uyghur torch bearers at the time that the Olympics began. And they showcased him and then had several statements from him that were very, very widely kind of reported in China, that everything is fine, there is nothing going on wrong. And there was then a press conference in which somebody raised a question, and then the Chinese representative there simply looked at the person and said, "These are all lies." And when there was a follow-up question, then again that kind of accusation continued, that these are all lies. Tennis player Peng's situation, most people know. But I think I simply want to say that unfortunately, China wanted to have its own image, to show power, to show its political muscle, to show that it's shining at the present time. And at this stage, with Russia and China in cahoot with each other, they are simply trying to project an image that the Western part of democracy, liberal democracy, the time has gone for it to be the ruling ideology in the world, that their democracy is much better. So I think I would probably stop here. I won't even take my full time, but I want to mention that unfortunately, these Olympics were not the shining example of what Olympics ought to be. They have got a very special purpose. They bring harmony, they bring people together, and that is why athletes went there, and that is why there was no boycott from athletes. There was diplomatic boycott from some countries, and it was Australia, it was Britain, it was United States, it was some other countries, but there wasn't any great deal of opposition to it. So Adityanji, thank you for bringing people together. And I am not the one who was there. I have not been in any of those countries, Hong Kong and others, where there is repression, and we've got speakers from there. And I am looking forward to listening to them. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Professor Ved Nanda, for a very, uh, apt introduction to the problem we are facing. And we needed a person like you, who is an international legal scholar, to put things in perspective. Yes, you have not had the lived experiences in the occupied countries by China, but you have the, in-depth knowledge about ongoing human rights abuses and what the implications are. So I really am very thankful to you, and I'm very sure that our viewers, appreciated your opening comments. I am going to introduce our next speaker, who was born in uh, Dharamshala, Tibet, and she has a LLM from Harvard and is a human rights activist and is currently based in Europe. So I'm going to introduce to you Thinlay Chukki Dasa. She's going to give her viewpoints. Ms. Dasa, kindly unmute yourself. Yes. So it's your turn to give your comments and your experiences.
Thank you so much, Dr. Adityanji, for giving me this opportunity. Thank you so much for the commission for this very timely discussion on a very, very important topic of human rights violations vis-a-vis the Beijing Olympics. As Honorable Ved Sir discussed about what is happening inside China, especially in view of the Olympics, how the athletes have come out and denounced the absolute censorship that they faced while they were in Beijing for the Olympics, competing for the Olympics. And also he mentioned how the athletes have come out and said that such a country which is known for violating basic human rights of not just a particular race, but of all the places that is under its rule, including Tibet, East Turkestan, which is widely known as now Xinjiang, Hong Kong, and now the threat of war against Taiwan. In my talk, I would want to, first of all, talk about how the Olympics should not have awarded the Winter Olympics to Beijing. This, I think, is one of the gravest, I wouldn't say mistake anymore. It is a blunder that they committed, because they knew, the IOC knew when they awarded the Summer Olympics of 2008, what a grave mistake that they had committed, because the tagline or the reason or how they sold the 2008 Olympics to everybody was that China should be given an opportunity to showcase its country and also to ensure that China gradually opens up to the international community. That did not happen. There were widespread protests, including in Tibet. Since then, 155 Tibetans have self-immolated in protest against the grave human rights violations being carried out by China against the Tibetans. And yet, IOC once again did the same thing. They awarded the Winter Olympics in 2015. And since the day it was awarded, we have been rigorously, we have been following up with the IOC to say that they should take it back. They should withdraw this awarding of the Olympics, not just because it is the gravest mistake that they are once again committing, but also because China has, after the 2008 Olympics, clearly shown to the world that it is no longer going to even bother to listen to the international community. We have seen how the Uyghurs and other Turkic Muslims have been put in the concentration camps. They first called it as a training. First, they denied absolute presence of such a program, and then they called it vocational training program, and then they went on and on renaming the program, eventually accepting the presence of that program, and how the Uyghurs and other Turkic Muslims are being put in the forced labor camps. And this is not just limited to Xinjiang or the Uyghur and Turkic Muslim community. It is widespread in Tibet as well. We have had reports of forced labor camps in Tibet. We have had reports of how the nomadic Tibetan nomads are being forcefully relocated from their grasslands. They have been wooed in the name of some sort of workshops or training programs to better their livelihood. But what we have seen is that this has just been one of the ways in which they have manipulated the Tibetans, especially the Tibetan nomads, from shifting their base from the grasslands to a center which is near to the urban area and also easier to control them. So the entire policy has been a strategic agenda to ensure that the nomadic Tibetans are being able to be controlled easily and therefore are being relocated in the name of environment conservation, in the name of dam building, in the name of development projects, so on and so forth. And furthermore, what we have seen is that there have been destructions of monasteries. Tibetan Buddhist centers have been demolished. There is a recent news of a Buddhist statue being demolished in Tibet. And some of the reporters and writers have likened it to how China is converting itself into a Taliban China. Because this happened in Afghanistan when Taliban was ruling. Very, very ancient Buddhist statues, the statues of Buddha were demolished, and China is now sort of following that footprint, and it is being called as Taliban China. Moreover, we have seen how the Tibetan children are being deprived of learning in their own mother tongue. They have been told that they can no longer study in the Tibetan language, but rather have to learn Mandarin. This is a systematic way of ensuring that the Tibetans' identity and culture are destroyed because they could not do it in the last 60 years. They want to ensure that in the next 60 years, there is nothing to be called as Tibet. There's nothing to be called as Tibetan or Tibetan language or Tibetan identity or Tibetan culture. This is a systematic way of ensuring that the entire Tibetan race is forgotten from the memory of the civilization. And rightfully, Tibetans have called this as cultural genocide against Tibetans. Now, in this background, when the IOC awarded the Winter Olympics to China, we have had several movements from Tibetans, from Uyghurs, from Hong Kongers coming out and calling on IOC to withdraw the awarding of the games. However, IOC has stood its ground more or less because of its own commercial interest. And for an organization like an IOC, which is supposedly to be based on the fundamental values of human values, this is beyond comprehension for many people. And this also comes in the backdrop of the recent UN, there were 50 UN experts, independent UN experts in 2020 who came out clearly calling on the UN and its General Assembly to ensure that decisive measures are taken against China for its egregious human rights violations. Those calls by the 50 UN independent experts have remained unanswered. we from the 4 Tibetan organizations, including the Swiss Tibetan Friendship Association, the Tibetan Community of Switzerland and Liechtenstein, the Tibetan Women's Association of Switzerland, and the Tibetan Youth Association in Europe, all 4 organizations came together and filed a case against the IOC, saying that they are violating the basic human rights of the people living in China, including the Tibetans, the Mongolians, the Hong Kongers, and the Uyghur Muslims, saying that their human rights are being violated. And by awarding the Olympics to China, they have become complicit in this egregious violations of human rights. The OECD, the Organization for Economic Development, Cooperation and Economic Development, they issued notice to the IOC to come before them to ensure that they answer the allegations that we had raised. However, IOC, on some pretext of not having enough good faith, refused to come to the table and negotiate with us, even though the initial assessment report clearly said that there is credible information to ensure that there are no longer human rights violations being carried out while holding the Olympics or after the Olympics. So this clearly shows that IOC is definitely complicit, not just the IOC, but also all those corporate brands that they have sponsored this Olympics. They are definitely complicit in this human rights violations and definitely complicit in the censorship that has been carried out against the athletes who participated in the Olympics. And I sincerely hope that the international community really looks into this matter, and especially the IOC, to relook in ensuring that no such Olympics are ever awarded to countries like China, which is known for its genocidal tendencies against its people. That's all from my side. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Thinlay Chukki, for, bringing to awareness the outrageous conduct of not just the Chinese government, but also the so-called civilized nations and so-called civilized organizations like IOC, as well as the corporate sponsors. So at ICHRRF, it is our duty to give our voice to those who have been persecuted and have been marginalized, and that is what we are doing this one day before the closing ceremony. So we heard an international perspective. We heard a perspective from China-occupied Tibet. Now we are going to go to another China-occupied country that has been subjugated. And here I would invite Rushan Abbas, who is a Uyghur or Uyghur activist. She's currently addressing us from Turkey. She will be talking about her subjugated nation, the harassment, intimidation, and human rights violation, which she herself has lived through and her family has lived through. So I'll give the floor to Rushan Abbas. Rushan, please.
Thank you, Dr. Adit. Thank you, ICHRRF, for organizing this important event. And thanks to the esteemed panelists here today taking a part of this important event. On the eve of the conclusion to the Genocide Olympics, we must say the world failed. It failed Uyghurs and the people of East Turkestan. It failed Tibetans. It failed Hong Kongers. It failed Southern Mongolians. And it failed humanity. May the International Olympic Committee always be seen as complicit in buying silence, in valuing profit above human life. The history books will say these games mirrored.
Please unmute yourself. You have been muted. Please unmute yourself.
Not sure why I got muted, sorry. Yes, the history books will say these games mirrored the 1936 Berlin Nazi Olympics, that the world turned away. We said never again, and yet here we are. again. The sponsors of these games are allowed their companies to be complicit and condone genocide. Coca-Cola, Airbnb, Procter & Gamble, and many others have been mute. We will not forget and continue to hold them to account. Coca-Cola even has a bottling plant in East Turkestan, and Tesla just opened a new facility there. The broadcasters of the genocidal games like NBC showed they value the almighty dollar over human life. The International Olympic Committee has a deplorable human rights record, and this adds to that record of disregard to human life and the support of now this second genocide on their watch after the Holocaust. In order to turn a gross profit, the IOC was willing to show complete lack of indifference to around a million Uyghur children ripped from their families, more than 3 million Uyghurs taken to concentration camps, Uyghur women facing systematic sexual violence and forced sterilizations and forced abortions and the slave labor on a mass scale. In doing so, the IOC is also complicit in the oppression of Tibetans, Hong Kongers, Mongolians, and those equal rights also continue to be discredited. I will always continue to fight for my people and for my sister taken by the regime in retaliation for my activism in America since September 2018. I am speaking to you today at the cost of my own innocent sister's freedom. I will not stop until she's found and free. When I think about my sister, I can only think about the horrific conditions that she now lives under, whether if she's still alive. I wonder if she is languishing in a cell or if she is forced to toil away every day making those souvenirs and the t-shirts sold at the Olympic Games today. Like Hitler's regime, China used the Olympics as a way to spread propaganda and to have a platform to deny their genocide. The Nazis promoted a lie of a free and open society before the Berlin Games, just as China portrays with Uyghurs today. If Americans knew then what we know now, would they have participated in Berlin? They say no, that they were deceived, uninformed, and information flow was too slow at that time. But today, this is 21st century, and the information era, the same kind of ignorance cannot be claimed anymore. The entire world is well aware of China's genocidal crimes, so we have no excuse. The host of the Olympics is a profound honor. China hosting such a prestige games while there is an active genocide is happening is an insult to the Olympic Games and the principles that the games carry. The regime even chose an Uyghur athlete to be the torch lighter in the Olympic relay in a pitiful attempt to showcase peace and harmony. Well, few but these lies. And after the lighting ceremony, we did not see her or hear from her again. The CCP's harsh genocidal policies and their ultra-nationalistic racism have been confirmed through Beijing's own leaked documents. What's happening in our homeland in East Turkestan today is a war against women, against children, a war against the original thought and religion, and a war against the democracy and the human lives, human values. The issue goes beyond the borders of China and not only into the Uyghurs diaspora abroad, but also the free-thinking societies like the famous NBA, NFL, Hollywood, academia, media, and many more, as you know, even some of the politicians. It's not simply an attempt to erase ethnic and religious identity or the exterminating the Uyghur people, but also an attack on the democracy and the freedom of our world here at home in United States. All the famous celebrities who are usually so vocal against any sort of social injustice are silent today against the Uyghur genocide because the perpetrator is China, and China has the money and the power. Kowtowing to a dictatorial regime like today's China, one betrays the very values of humanity. So never forget that while these games are played, millions of Uyghurs are suffering, and they are producing consumer goods for the rest of the world to consume. And never forget that the IOC refused to guarantee that their souvenirs at these genocidal games were not made with slave labor, with the blood, sweat, and the tears of my people. Never forget that. However, in some respect, we won. We won the war of words. China's propaganda failed to fool the world, and I doubt the CCP imagined the world would be so enraged about their genocide that we would even care. And though companies and the world have not acted in haste or adequately enough, we have made a resounding sound in the darkness. China knows the world is watching. China knows the international community condemns their actions. China knows they cannot hide. And the polling numbers cannot lie. Fewer people have tuned into these genocidal games than any other Olympic Games in the past 50 years. Our boycott worked in part. Millions refused to watch in solidarity with Uyghurs, Tibetans, Hong Kongers, and many other people who are suffering under this Chinese communist regime. I was one of them, and I hope you were as well. So besides refusing to watch the last day of the games, the closing ceremony tomorrow, where do we go from here? I ask the world to continue to stand in solidarity with Uyghurs, Tibetans, Hong Kongers, Southern Mongolians, and the Chinese dissidents who have fought against the CCP for so long. I also encourage us to support a growing genocide divestment movement that has begun at the universities such as George Washington University. They call for divestment of the university endowment from companies complicit in Uyghur genocide, as well as additional measures to protect the rights and the well-being of students. Often ignored is the protection of Uyghurs in the diaspora living abroad. Uyghurs living outside China face systematic harassment and the surveillance designed to silence them or coerce them into returning to the People's Republic of China. Universities have been at the center of this campaign, with the students on US college campuses often facing surveillance, manipulation, and coercion. Uyghurs of the diaspora do not even feel safe in the free world, knowing that China tracks Uyghurs in every country, monitoring their whereabouts. Universities have a moral duty to protect their students, and the countries have a moral contract to not repatriate Uyghurs back to China, back into the hands of genocide. If they do, they have blood on their hands. So we must also fight to denounce homegrown hatred in our local communities against the Muslims, African Americans, Hispanic Americans, Asian Americans, and the Jewish, and all minority people. Genocide does not start out as genocide. Genocide is a process. It begins as microaggressions. It begins with othering, calling the groups of people the other. It begins with xenophobia, prestige, and the bias, prejudice and the bias. We must fight to halt this in all communities, practicing compassion and equal rights for all. If we do not, over time, something as horrible as genocide can occur. Time shows this, and we need to stop this genocide of my people and China's war against the freedom and democracy. We are all responsible for what happens next. Thank you.
Thank you, Rushan Abbas, for a very moving presentation. We understand your emotions because you have personal lived experiences. So you are able to very cogently describe to us what you went through, what your family went through. And we are in solidarity with all the oppressed nationalities that have been subjugated, occupied, and colonized by Communist China, including East Turkestan, which used to be an independent nation, just like independent Tibet. So most of the world does not know about the independent existence of these two countries. And I think that holding this symposium will, raise the international voice in support of the cause of independence of Tibet and independence of East Turkestan. Thank you, Rushan.
Thank you.
I'm going to invite another speaker from China occupied Tibet, who is currently resident in Dharamshala, India, and that's a very young activist, Sonam Tsering. He is General Secretary of Tibetan Youth Congress. So, Sonam, the floor is yours. Please unmute yourself.
Thank you for the kind opportunity. I, on behalf of the Tibetan Youth Congress, extend our warm greetings to all the speakers. As rightly spoken by our other guest speakers, Olympic game is a game of glory and an opportunity for the sportsmen and women to share the spirit of love, friendship among the nations. But this time it is hosted at Beijing by the Communist Party of China, a regime that is responsible for the murdering of millions of Tibetans, Uyghurs, and others who are colonized and controlled under an oppressive and repressive system. It is hosted by a regime that is responsible for the continuous gross human rights violations inside Tibet and other countries. And a month, as rightly pointed out by Thinlay Chukki, a month ahead of the Olympic, China in Tango, one of the Tibetan region, they have destroyed a Buddha statue and a school down to ashes. These are the critical issues, what is happening inside Tibet as just a month ahead of the Olympic. And Tibetan Youth Congress and other more than 150 organizations, from the beginning, we have urging the IOC not to award the opportunity to host this Winter Olympic by Beijing. We have urged them not to give this opportunity to Beijing. We have urged the international community and the governments to do a complete boycott against this genocide game. And we have also urged the participants, athletes, not to attend the opening and closing ceremonies as a show of protest and to show the support and solidarity with our just cause. And it is, as we see that more and more athletes are speaking up, and hope more and more participant athletes will speak when they get back to their country. And although Beijing, they have warned the participating athletes not to speak on anything, not to speak on the sensitive issues. I hope more and more participating athletes will speak. And also, we have seen that the how this Winter Olympic has felt in many ways. Even it's in the conditions of the quarantine centers, either it's the uh, space where the participant athletes can share their views. So this is the how Beijing has handled, how they have disrespect this precious game, and this has to be seriously take up by the international community, so as not to give Beijing this kind of public opportunities in near future. Uh, so this game will be wrapping up tomorrow, despite our continuous protests against this game, and it will end by tomorrow. But the Chinese communists will continue to commit human rights violations, and they will continue to commit atrocities against the Tibetans and others. Therefore, we will continue to do our campaign activities to expose the uh, inhuman treatment to the Tibetans and others. So, so this is a very brief point from my side, and many of the points were already covered and shared by Thinlay Chukki, and I'm sure that others will share the same. So, thank you all.
Thank you very much, Sonam, for raising your voice and the important point you make that Beijing Winter Olympics may end tomorrow, but the Chinese oppression of the subjugated nations will probably continue as it has gone on since 1949, 1950 onwards, when China occupied these independent nations. And the fight for independence should also continue, and the solidarity of the international community with these colonized nations in 21st century must continue. There have been empires and empires, and those empires have crumbled after World War II. Unfortunately, Chinese empire regrouped after same World War II. So we share our anguish, we share our support, we share our solidarity with these occupied nations. I am going to invite my next speaker, who is actually from India's Union Territory of Ladakh. Ethnically speaking, he belongs to a region called Gilgit and Baltistan, which is under adverse occupation of a country, and it has become almost a G2 condominium with Chinese economic exploitation in cahoot with dictatorship from Pakistan. So I'm going to invite my next speaker, Mr. Senge Sering, who is the director of Institute of Gilgit and Baltistan in Washington, D.C. Senge, please unmute yourself. We cannot hear you, Senge. Can you raise your volume, please? We still cannot hear you. We cannot hear you. Please raise your volume.
Hear me or no?
Okay, now we can hear you.
All right, thank you so much. So I really appreciate giving me this opportunity. Many of you are my friends that I've met or talked to before, so I really appreciate the hard work that you guys are doing. As you all know, whatever we do is a thankless job, and this is an opportunity for me to thank all of you for the tireless efforts that you make to represent your own communities. And before I start my presentation, I would like to request all of you to observe a moment of silence in honor of all those people that have lost their lives and that we claim to represent in different parts of Chinese occupied territories, Pakistan occupied territories, and other areas. Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. So we're talking about Beijing Olympics right now, Winter Olympics. Unfortunately, the international community, despite the fact that we have, past examples when there were boycotts from the Western community against either players or the events, the entire events. This time, I think the international community could not put enough pressure on their member states and individual participants to observe a boycott. So the event went ahead. United States started the diplomatic boycott, and some other countries joined. I think there were more than 200 nonprofit organizations that were putting a lot of pressure on President Biden to observe a boycott. There were a lot of congressmen, representatives who wanted either this to be postponed or relocated into another country. Some nonprofit organizations even went to directly talk to the participants, athletes, but I think there was a lack of cooperation from IOC, International Olympic Committee, and that's why they could not do boycott on individual levels. They could be, have been banned. There could be heavy fines on them, so that was something that probably they could not afford. But what happened, I think, whether it was a full boycott or just diplomatic boycott, but what we see is that China lost a lot of prestige, and internationally, China was insulted. It was embarrassed. There's a sense of isolation that China's feeling, and that's why China was working overtime to invite all its allies to join. And that's why Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan was there with his entourage. Gilgit-Baltistan is in Pakistani occupations. Obviously, that is something that we, keep an eye on what's going on between Pakistan and China relationship. And, Imran Khan was there to show solidarity with China and support China as far as, Chinese policies of oppression and genocides are concerned in Xinjiang, which we call East Turkestan, and Xizang, which we call Tibet, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and other occupied areas like Inner Mongolia. And at the same time, Prime Minister Imran Khan was there to obviously collect some money because Pakistan is heavily dependent on Chinese money to run its day-to-day affairs. They were expecting anywhere between 3 to all the way to $11 billion in loans from China. Some of them were going to be paid as against the balance payments. Some of them were going to be the credit swap arrangements. Some were going to be the new payments. Pakistan was also expecting that Chinese president would turn their visit into a state visit. But what we saw is that there was not much that China could offer to Pakistan this time, and that shows a lot about how China-Pakistan relationship is eroding, despite the heavy claims that they make, lofty claims that they make. Imran Khan was going to take more than 10 cabinet members with him to China, and the Chinese insisted that he should limit them to 4 people. Most of the meetings that he was going to do with the businessmen there happened virtually. As we all know, there was no physical meeting, so there was an embarrassment for Pakistani entourage there. And till last moment, there was no guarantee that President Xi Jinping will come and meet Imran Khan personally. So I think that is something that, it tells a lot about how Pakistan-China relationship is evolving. Now, my area, as Dr. Aditya said, it's constitutionally part of India that is occupied by Pakistan for the last 75 years. And because of its occupation, China has been able to extend itself into Gilgit-Baltistan to not only, enjoy the transit route that it connects with, with Pakistan and other nations in the Indian Ocean, but also to enjoy harvesting local natural resources. For instance, just like they're doing in Xinjiang, they're doing in Tibet, which is uranium and copper and gold and gas and oil resources that, East Turkestan has to offer. And China is doing the same right now in Gilgit-Baltistan. And so Pakistan is slowly moving, toward China, and then now they're trying to meet Russia as well. I think, although because of the Ukrainian situation, we do not know if that meeting is going to happen or not between Imran Khan and Russian president. But they're expecting that at the end of this month they will be having a meeting. So Pakistan is desperately seeking a new alliance, which is between China, Pakistan, and Russia. But as far as Pakistani businessmen are concerned, they're very nervous about that because they have done in the last 75 years, they have done a lot of investment in Europe and Australia and in America, Canada, and I think they are not very happy that Pakistan is putting all its eggs in one basket. So I think that is one of the reasons that Pakistan Chief of Army Staff is going to be here tomorrow, I think, or maybe Monday. He's coming and he's going to meet his counterparts in this country, and they're going to discuss future U.S.-Pakistan relationship. So what we have seen is that this visit of Pakistani Prime Minister has exposed Pakistan's hollow claims about it stands for Islam, it stands for Muslim community, it stands for the rights of the Muslims. And Pakistani Prime Minister, when he was in China, he openly said that, my ambassador, he went to Urumqi and he talked to the local people, and there is no oppression against Uyghurs there. And, other things that he said about, Tibet and other areas. And he was very, openly, supporting China for whatever China is doing in South China Sea, for instance, causing, an alarm for the international community for the open trade routes. And China has been, eroding Pakistani democratic institutions through the money that it supplies to the local politicians and Pakistani military generals. And that relationship has, made the local politicians hostile to Chinese interests. So basically, whatever Pakistan is saying about, it stands for the people in Kashmir, for instance, for people in Palestine, for instance. It's all a big lie, because when it comes to Pakistan's personal interest, it is willing to, we have seen in the past that there were Uyghurs in Pakistan who were sold by Pakistan to the Chinese authorities for per head amount. They took money to hand over Uyghurs to the Chinese authorities. So I think that is something that, has exposed Pakistan. Did somebody talk? Okay. So what is happening is that, after Prime Minister came back, he has now gone into extra drive mode, and he has convened a very important meeting, an emergency meeting of his staff members, and they're trying to do something on Gilgit. They're trying to alter the status of Gilgit, because China is very nervous about the situation in Gilgit, and Gilgit is the only land route between Pakistan and China. So there are some rumors that eventually Pakistan is going to bring in few amendments into its constitution to give Gilgit some sort of like ad hoc or temporary provincial status. So that's what we are talking about right now. And the entire leadership from Gilgit-Baltistan in Islamabad right now, they're meeting Pakistani politicians, they're meeting Pakistani lawmakers and some other like important people. And there are possibilities. I mean, we know that, Imran, there is a no confidence move going on against Imran Khan himself. So we don't know if this government will last another month or two because of what Prime Minister, what Muslim League and People's Party are doing. But in case this government lasts, then there's a chance that they will change the status of Gilgit-Baltistan and they will bring in certain legislation that will enable Chinese and Pakistanis to directly take control of the local natural resources and bring in Pakistanis as citizens and change the local demography. And so it's been, the meeting's been going on for the last 2 or 3 weeks. And now I think they have a first draft on this constitutional amendment that we're talking about. And local people have found few irregularities that they have mentioned, and I think they will come up with the second draft. So it seems like Pakistan is very desperate because of China's pressure to change Gilgit's demographic status, the ethnic and linguistic and religious makeup of Gilgit. So whatever people in Urumqi or Lhasa are facing right now is something that Gilgit is going to face very soon, all over the entire area. And unfortunately, our population is very small. It's like 1.5 million. It's not like Tibet with 6 million people, or it's not like East Turkestan with, I don't know, 10 or 11 million people. It's a very small area. So it's very easy to control 1.5 million people and convert them into minority. And that is something that, might not take 10, 15 years, like in places like, for instance, East Turkestan, it will take a much longer time and there will be a lot more resistance from the local people. But we don't expect that coming from Gilgit. So that is something that, I think the international community is overlooking right now. When it comes to Pakistan-China relationship, is that China-Pakistan relationship is not only going to hurt, in democratic processes and institutions. It is not going to hurt, open borders. It is not just going to hurt, the ethnic and linguistic status in each area, but eventually it is going to completely destroy the ancient cultures and their livelihoods and take their resources away from them. So people in Balochistan, for instance, people in the Pashtun areas, people in Sindh, like right now China is taking a lot of natural resources without paying on any money from Gilgit, like heavy metals. They're taking a lot of coal out of Sindh, for instance, and they're enjoying this, abundance of wealth while the local people suffer. There's no electricity, there's no water, there's no colleges, there's no schools, and the money that could have been spent on the local people, unfortunately, it is being siphoned off to Beijing, and that is something that another problem that we see in the coming years is growth of terrorism, because now we see that Taliban have taken control of Afghanistan, and Gilgit-Baltistan shares border with Afghanistan. So we will see that this is something that is going to affect the local people. And unfortunately, this relationship Pakistan with the Taliban is going to encourage China to take more interest in Afghanistan and eventually legitimize the presence of Taliban there, which is going to be detrimental for women, for minorities, for people in Gilgit-Baltistan and other areas. So I think these are some of the issues that Pakistan and China's relationship is going to affect people in Balochistan, Gilgit-Baltistan, the Pashtun and Sindh areas in the coming months and years, and I hope that international community is able to look into how China is growing economically, and that is not bringing a positive change as far as the rest of the world is concerned. Growth of China, empowerment of China is adversely affecting people like from my region, from Balochistan, from East Turkestan, and this is something that goes against the principle of coexistence and helping each other grow collectively and create a civilized society. And I think that is detrimental for an overall healthy growth environment that we expect in the coming years. So I will stop there, and thank you so much, Dr. Aditya.
Thank you, Senge. When I gave my comments, I had said that, it's almost like a G2 condominium of China and Pakistan and Gilgit and Baltistan. After listening to your presentation, I would actually change my statement to say that they are partners in crime, in colonization, economic exploitation, and cultural genocide of Ladakhis who are living in Gilgit and Baltistan. Before I open this to question and answer session, I would like to briefly invite Professor Nawang Lakshi, who is a college professor and a practicing psychotherapist based in US. So Professor Lakshi, brief comments from you on this issue.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for organizing this event. It's a critical time and critical platform. I'm here as an individual human being. I stand against genocide and occupation and Chinese policy of oppression and policy of oppression across the globe. It is critical to have critical consciousness, and along with the action, I think that is exemplified here in this platform. It's good to be able to collaborate and look at different institutions and how can we work collaboratively and collectively to address some of these issues, even at personal and local and different international areas. And it's not just oppression and genocide, but also any kind of violence, any kind of exploitation, prejudice. I think one of the speakers brought up like a microaggression and so forth. I think it's really important to reflect on justice, respect, and responsibility and human responsibility along with human rights and equality. How can we share, how can we foster some of these qualities at personal, global, and local, and different institutional level? So thank you for the opportunity, and I'll look forward to future collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Lakshi. I'm going to go on to question and answers. And first question is Mr. Carl Clemens. And I think the most appropriate speaker would be Rushan Abbas. The question is, what is the level of support Uyghurs activists are getting? And the specific question is, does even Turkey support their cause forcefully, or these causes are used only for diplomatic leverage?
Thank you. That's a great question. Luckily, in the United States, we have bipartisan support. Both Democrats and the Republicans, they support Uyghur cause. And for many countries, who are actually taking humanity over China's trade threats or blood money or the power of the Belt and Road Initiative or manipulations. They are supporting the Uyghur cause. There are the many countries who are not depending on the China's economy. In Turkey, we are here in Turkey right now. We see there are about 50 to 60,000 Uyghur people living in Turkey without any trouble, not facing any kind of danger of deportation, just like India is giving strong support for Tibetans as the base activity, campaigns, but we don't see a lot of Indian government supporting or condemning China. So the case in Turkey is similar to that. Turkey is a home for thousands of Uyghur refugees, while the Uyghurs are facing deportations from many other Muslim majority countries, such as Egypt and Saudi Arabia, even UAE and many other countries. So when it comes down to having a support from EU or other countries or, in organizations, I would call on any country who cares for conscience should take action and support the Uyghurs and the call on China's genocide, because the conscience of the world and the humanity is at test while we are witnessing an active genocide, slavery, and the deadly pandemic, which also the PRC is responsible for, because when it was epidemic in one city in Wuhan, they hide the case from the world, and here we are today. And the yet we are also being told that we are inciting a Cold War with the United States when we talk about the genocide and talk about disengaging with China. But we are already in a Cold War. We are already in a war that China is waging against the democracy. And the genocide creates a line in the sand. We can continue to toe the line, but the wolf is at our door right now, and we refuse to admit it. So we need to think about that, and we need to wake up before it's too late. So I call on anybody with humanity. You don't need to be Uyghur, or you don't need to be Muslim, or you don't even need to be a human rights activist to take action to hold China accountable. All you need is a human with a heart. Thank you.
Thank you, Rushan. I'll go to next question, and it is again from Mr. Clemens, and it goes to our speakers who represent China-occupied Tibet. And the question is, Tibetan representatives have been running from pillar to post for decades now. Have any nation states done anything substantial to help their cause? So whether Thinlay Chukki or Sonam Tsering, they want to address this?
Thank you so much, Mr. Clemens, for that very important question. When it comes to support of the Tibet, the first and the foremost country that has always stood for the welfare of the Tibetans has been India. It has not just granted refuge for the Tibetans at one of the most critical times in its history, but has continued to provide with every facilities for the Tibetan refugees in India. Even though India has not signed the Refugee Convention, Tibetans are living under the Foreigners Act and the Foreigners Rules of the Indian laws. But the government of India has always considered Tibetans as one of the most important guests, and have always been supportive for the Tibetans. And when it comes to other countries, of course, the United States United States and Canada in North America, two of the biggest countries, have always been very supportive. We have received bipartisan support from the US. We have several laws that have been enacted. One of the most important laws that was enacted in the US was the Reciprocal Access to Tibet Act, which gave an opportunity for all the Americans to be able to visit Tibet as the Chinese visit parts of the US. Also, the Tibet Support and Policy Act, again, one of the most crucial laws that have been passed in the recent times, providing tremendous support for the Tibetans, not just in the terms of finances, but also in terms of recognizing His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and also ensuring that China does not install a puppet in his place, because for us, His Holiness the Dalai Lama is not just a religious leader, but also a spiritual leader, and we want his reincarnation to be untainted by the Chinese Communist Party. When it comes to terms of Europe, we have received, we continue to receive tremendous support from the European Union, European Parliament, Germany, United Kingdom, Switzerland. So there are many, many countries which continue to support the Tibetan movement. And what we currently lack is the political motive to go ahead, because when it comes to China, it has been one of the most challenging part, because the extent of economic dependency on China has in fact stunned the world, because even though there are proposals for decoupling from the economic dependencies between the countries, it has not been possible because of the extent of dependency and also the political will to do it. So if you look at the United Nations, you have the Human Rights Council, which discusses one of the major human rights atrocities, one of the most important institutions to discuss the human rights atrocities across the globe. However, we have seen that China has been approaching different blocks to ensure that it does not get support. The issue of Tibet or the issue of Xinjiang or Hong Kong does not get support from the Human Rights Council. And this is being done by way of ensuring that some sort of economic advantages are given to the countries which otherwise would have voted against China or its policies. So I think it is time that the countries wake up and understand that with the Belt and Road Initiative, what we have seen is that many countries, including we have countries in Asia which are facing the human rights violations, maybe not to the extent of what the Tibetans, the Uyghurs, and the Hong Kongers are facing inside under the rule of China, but definitely they are getting a taste of the atrocities that they are facing, and therefore these countries need to be much more aware about how much door that they are willing to open to China through these initiatives.
Thank you, Ms. Chukki. Sonam, do you want to give any response from your side on that question?
Nothing more than what Thinlay Chukki has said already. But the Tibet support groups are growing, and many of the foreign friends are supporting and showing their solidarity with the Tibetans. And many of them are more Tibetan than Tibetans when it comes to pointing their fingers against the China, like many of you. So with this platform, I extend my sincere gratitude to all of you for extending your support in this time of great need. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
I might say a word.
Sure, go ahead, sir. Go ahead.
I think the point simply is that at this stage, no country wants to stand up to China on the issue of freedom, independence for Tibet. Obviously, Tibetans are being helped. I have been to Dharamshala, I have been to McLeodganj, and sat with people in the Human Rights Center. And one of my students, research assistants, spent 2 years working there. And my students helped at that time for him to do a couple studies and to send at least an effort on his part and on the part of the center to reach out to countries seeking their assistance. And that geopolitical considerations are not permitting at this stage any country to take up China. Lithuania, just simply on the issue of keeping Taiwan and having relationship with Taiwan, and China is the one that's going to has taken steps diplomatic against that country. Australia, Latin American countries, small islands in the Pacific. So I think the point simply is that it's very hard for countries to take an issue with China on that count. Helping Tibetans, I think certainly India has done a good job. Having been with His Holiness the Dalai Lama a couple times, spending time with my students, almost an hour with him, and I think I can totally understand the difficulties.
Thank you, Professor Nanda. May I take the liberty of inviting somebody from the audience to make a statement? I know that Dolma has joined in the audience. Dolma, would you like to make a statement on this issue, please? Dolma, if you wish to make a statement, please unmute yourself and you can make a statement. If not, we will understand why you would not like to speak. Looks like Dolma is not going to make a statement. Dolma Gayari is the Minister of Interior in Central Tibetan Administration. So I had hoped that maybe she might like to make a statement, but never mind. I think the point has been very eloquently conveyed to our audience. I'm going to make one additional statement to what Rushan Abbas said about Uyghurs and their, sort of slow genocide happening. There's something else that is happening in East Turkestan, and that is sexual slavery of women. The Uyghur men who have been taken away from their homes by Communist Party of China in so-called, vocational rehabilitation camps or concentration camps or torture camps, Chinese Communist Party has assigned, quote unquote, Han Chinese minders who have been reported to be sleeping with these women, and they have no choice. I think in 21st century, this type of sexual slavery is despicable. And time has come for some of the legal scholars or activists to file lawsuits against this sexual slavery in jurisdiction that take up extrajudicial cases, extraterritorial judicial cases when human rights are concerned. So that is definitely an issue that has not been highlighted, but there is sexual slavery going on in Eastern Turkestan. Rushan.
I think I might say before, I'm sorry to interrupt you, universal jurisdiction, Adityanji, is something that at the present time Germany and a couple of European countries have begun, but that is not an issue that many countries are willing to take. The one possible solution, and that was very, very successful in South Africa, is an effort that was already made that countries, people, activists, and organizations They can say, do not invest. And if you have investment, disinvestment policy. And why I say that is that at that time I was at Yale, and students, I was president of the World Community Association, my Yale student body, law school. And we took that disincentive, the incentive not to invest in South Africa. And that movement, as you remember, continued, and that succeeded. That succeeded to the extent that even Reagan, President Reagan, lost at that time the opportunity to have his veto to be upheld by the Senate and by the House. So I think that is one issue that probably ought to be taken very seriously, that organizations, individuals, countries are not going to do that, but put a great deal of pressure upon companies. Companies are not willing to do that, but I think that pressure can at least have some impact upon companies.
Rushan, do you want to say anything about sexual slavery of Uyghur women?
Yes, absolutely. The Chinese government itself reported 1.1 million Han Chinese people deployed to Uyghur homes live inside of their homes. And when most of the men are taken to the concentration camps and forced labor facilities, the Uyghur women are subject to sexual abuse in their own home, in their own bed. And also, the Uyghur girls are forced to marry Han Chinese men, and the Chinese government is offering money, housing, and the jobs for those Han Chinese men to come to East Turkestan and marry Uyghur girls. If she says no for such a forced marriage, she and her entire family will be sent to the concentration camps and being labeled as extremists or radicalized Muslims did not want to marry non-Muslim Han Chinese. So basically, Uyghur women, their bodies are being the battleground in this genocide while they are facing forced sterilizations, forced abortions, forcibly inserting IUD devices in their bodies. They're also facing the Chinese Communist government sponsored mass rape of the Uyghur women basically today. So that's why, I mentioned earlier in my speech, where are the leading feminists? Where are the celebrities always so vocal against any kind of social injustice, and they are supposed to speak and protect the children's rights and women's rights? Where are they? I don't hear anybody raising the Uyghur women's issue, Uyghur children's issue. So
Thank you,
basically,
Thank
I
you,
just want to
Rushan.
say one thing. I know that we are running out of time, but we are voluntarily giving out our freedom of speech, freedom of expression today, means that we are also giving away our sovereignty, our democracy, and the freedom that we all worked so hard to establish in the United States and the other Western democratic world. Thank you.
Thank you, Rushan. I'll just make one last comment. Professor Nanda had mentioned that Germany has, legal system that can take universal jurisdiction. The two other European countries that take extraterritorial jurisdiction claim are Spain and Portugal. So the hope is that one of the activist organizations might file a lawsuit against Communist Party of China, its mandarins, and People's Republic of China, targeting their assets that are abroad. Because when it hurts economically, you may not be able to do anything to the government of China or People's Liberation Army, but if you target their economic and other assets that are part of BRI, you may get some success. So there is some way of trying to redress the
I am
injustice.
looking for some pro bono attorneys actually to sue the Chinese government, putting my innocent sister and also spreading libel against me and attacking me. So anybody help, please contact me. I am looking for suing the PRC. Thank you. Thanks for interrupting you. I just want to get this in before the panel ends.
We have run out of time. I'm very thankful to our speakers. I'm very thankful to our participants to come and join us on Saturday morning on this issue, but it's a serious issue. And I would just let you know that our website will have the recording of this entire session within the next 24 hours. So if people who have not been able to join, they can join on the YouTube channel. And our support would be consistently there for human rights, for religious freedom, for women's rights, children's rights. We are here with those who have been marginalized, who have been persecuted, and we at ICHRRF are not scared of hyperpowers or superpowers or their governments. So our voice shall always be in support of the meek, the subjugated, the oppressed, and that is why we are here for, and that's the reason we organized this symposium one day before the closing ceremony of Beijing Winter Olympics that should not have been held in Beijing, knowing the track record. And as I said, the Hall of Shame involves and will continue to involve International Olympic Committee and 13 corporate sponsors that are economically supporting these games. Thank you very much indeed, and namaskar. And I hope that in my lifetime changes happen and these subjugated nations are made independent. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.